Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to Alfonso Speaks, and welcome back to more Independent Voter Reacts. Before we get into today's video, like, share, and subscribe to the channel. I want to give a big shout out, a big thank you to new friend of the channel, Matthew Lorette, who sent me a few links of JD Vance's recent interviews. He sent me 3 different ones that he did with 3 different networks. So the first one we're going to check out is with CNN, because as we know, CNN is a left leaning. Gosh, such a tongue twister every time. They are extremely left leaning. They don't like Trump at all. We know that. But we're gonna see the interview that they had with Vice President nominee JD Vance, and we're gonna see what the questions were like. We're gonna see what his answers were like, and we're just gonna call it like it is. But again, we have 2 other ones coming. I can actually tell you right now who those interviews were with. So the other one is going to be with Face the Nation, and then the last one is going to be with ABC News. So yeah, I'm just going to get into it. Again, leave your emotions at the door. I already know, Trump supporters, you don't like CNN. I don't care that you don't like CNN. We're just reacting to the interview. Deal with it or go watch something else. I really don't care. Like, I don't care. I don't care. I didn't create this interview. It was recommended to me to watch it. I'm going to watch it. Let's do it.
Thank you so much for doing this.
Yeah.
Appreciate it, Senator.
Thank you.
Within a week of you being named on the VP ticket, the Democratic nominee changed. And you guys seem to be struggling a little bit with how to approach the new dynamic.
I already have a problem with how she's asking this question, because it does show bias. I don't like that. Like, even if in reality they are struggling, that's not for you to tell us. Just let them speak for themselves, because JD Vance is probably going to disagree that they're struggling. But again, this is the problem that we have with media in our country, right? Like, if somebody's just a bad nominee and their policies are bad and they're just a bad person, let them tell us. You don't have to tell us. Just lead them to the water. But right now, you're drinking the water with them. It doesn't make any sense.
How are you approaching your new opponent and the new ticket?
Yeah, well, I think it's pretty straightforward, actually. We're running against a set of policies that I think have failed the American people, and we're running to a set of policies, President Trump's 4 years in office, that I think really succeeded for the American people. And I think that what's different about it, and you're right, Dana, it is different, but what's different about it is that we're running against a different person who a lot of Americans just don't know. And so I think we have to remind people that President Trump delivered lower prices, lower inflation, a prosperous and peaceful world, and also a secure border, and Kamala Harris's policies have produced the exact opposite. Now, that was an easier case to make when Joe Biden was in there because people associate Joe Biden with the policies, but I think Kamala Harris clearly owns the policies of the Biden-Harris administration, especially when we consider the fact that, as we've all learned over the last few months, Joe Biden clearly isn't capable of doing the job. And so I think that drives home that Kamala Harris really has been the one calling the shots. I mean, how could she not? I think Joe Biden doesn't really know where he is.
Kamala Harris has been calling the shots. As who?
Well, I think she has to have been, right? Because if she's not calling the shots, Dana, then who is? And I do think it drives.
See, okay, so this is one of the issues that I really have with the Republican Party, or at least those who are leading it. Like, that's a conspiracy theory right there. That's a clear case of a conspiracy theory that you're trying to convince the American people of. That's not, you have no evidence to back that up. See, this is the issue. Like, you can't just yell stuff into the distance without any evidence to back it up. Like, yes, you're going to get your base voters. Like, people who already love Trump, that already love the Republican Party, are going to vote for you no matter what. But this doesn't bring in any new voters. Oh, how could it not be? Where is your proof? Where is your proof that Kamala Harris is calling all the shots? Where is your proof that Joe Biden isn't really leading this administration, but it's Kamala Harris? You have no proof to back it up. You're just throwing conspiracy theories out there.
drives home something that's fundamentally dishonest about the way that Vice President Harris and also a lot of senior Democrats have approached this. If you remember, for months, even years, the argument was that Joe Biden was sharp, he could clearly do the job, and the minute that he performed poorly in that debate and he became political dead weight, you have Kamala Harris and everybody else trying to throw him overboard. But I think the more troubling question is, why did so many senior Democrats, including the Vice President, cover for him? And if Joe Biden wasn't capable of doing the job, as even a lot of Democrats say now, was Kamala Harris in charge or was somebody else in charge? And that's a real issue.
There's no evidence that Kamala Harris threw him overboard. But I want to move on to something that Governor Walz has called you and Donald Trump, and that is weird.
Sure.
And it is taken off. The New York Times reports that when Donald Trump was asked about it, he said, "Not me, they're talking about JD."
Feel like your photo.
That's crazy. Why are there ads? Oh my gosh, amateur hour again. How many times do we go through this, guys, on this channel where I realize I'm on the wrong channel, and I have one channel that has YouTube Premium, so I don't have ads on that one, and I have another one that I don't have the Premium account on, and this is what happens. So okay. Let's pick it back up. There will be no more ads for the rest of the video.
Trump was asked about it. He said, "Not me, they're talking about JD."
I'll rewind just a little bit so you guys can hear the full question.
And that's a real issue.
There's no evidence that Kamala Harris threw him overboard. But I want to move on to something that Governor Walz has called you and Donald Trump, and that is weird.
Sure.
And it is taken off. The New York Times reports that when Donald Trump was asked about it, he said, "Not me, they're talking about JD."
Well, certainly they've levied that charge against me more than anybody else, but I think that it drives home how they're trying to distract from their own policy failures. I mean, look, this is fundamentally schoolyard bully stuff. They can accuse me of whatever they want to accuse me of. As Harry S. Truman once said, if you can't take the heat, stay out of the kitchen. And I'm doing this because I think that me being vice president will help improve people's lives. So I accept their attacks, but I think that it is a little bit of projection, Dana. If you think about just take a couple of days ago. Tim Walz gives this big speech. He's been announced as the VP nominee. And I remember when I had just been announced as the VP nominee, I gave my big speech and I saw my wife and I gave her a big hug and a kiss because I love my wife and I think that's what a normal person does. Tim Walz gave his wife a nice, firm Midwestern handshake and then tried to sort of awkwardly correct for it. So I think that what it is two people, Kamala Harris and Tim Walz, who aren't comfortable in their own skin because they aren't comfortable with their policy positions for the American people. And so they're name calling instead of actually telling the American people how they're going to make their lives better. I think that's weird, Dana, but look.
Is this man accusing them of like they haven't been doing the same thing? You've been accusing her of being a DEI hire, been accusing her of turning black. You can't cast stones when you have a glass house.
Like, they can call me whatever they want to.
You're saying Tim Walz doesn't have affection for his wife? I don't even understand that.
I said that he acted weird, which he did, on a national stage in front of his wife and in front of millions of Americans who presumably were watching at home. And I think that it's projection, Dana. Look, I think this election should be about who's going to solve the inflation crisis, who's going to make groceries and housing more affordable, who's going to secure that southern border. Kamala Harris's record is that she supported all of the policies that made that problem worse, Dana. We're trying to say we're going to take the country in a different direction. I really think that it's important to point this out, Dana. Their entire campaign has not been about, here's our policy for how we're going to make your life better, or here's what's wrong with Donald Trump and J.D. Vance's policies. We're going to name call and hope that you don't notice that we don't have an agenda. That is the entire Democrat approach to this election.
They have done both. They have both policies, and they are trying to define you as well.
If you go to Kamala Harris's campaign page right now, they still don't have a policy.
Well, let's talk about policy
positions
versus
about what they're going to do. I think that's really insulting to Americans.
You started out talking about the policies in this interview, but you have been on the campaign trail questioning Tim Walz's military record. You say it was shameful that Governor Walz retired from the military before his unit deployed to Iraq. I want to read you something that Joe Eustace, who is a veteran, he served with Governor Walz, said. He said that's a lie. He said he was as good a soldier as you'll find. I'm not trying to defend him. I hope people don't think that. What I'm trying to do is defend someone who served his country. I'm not voting for him. I'll campaign against him. But I don't think it's fair to characterize his service the way they have. Governor Walz served 24 years.
Sure.
He even stayed after he could have retired because of 9/11, more than the country asked of him. Do you honor his service?
Well, of course, Dana, I honor his service, and I've never criticized what Tim Walz did when he was in the military. I criticized his retirement decision, and most importantly, Dana, I criticized his lying about his own record, okay? This is a guy who was captured on video saying, I carried a gun in war. He never went to war. This is a guy who's been captured on video. As other people say, he's an Afghanistan veteran. He's a veteran of a war, nodding along in agreement instead of saying, no, I did serve my country and I did it honorably, but I never went to a war zone. I'm not criticizing Tim Walz's service. I'm criticizing the fact that he lied about his service for political gain, Dana. Now, I served in the United States Marine Corps, and you know this. And look, there are a lot of things that I'm proud about. I've never lied about what I did or overstated it because it would be beneficial to me in an election. I think that's what Tim Walz did. That's what I was criticizing. And yes, I do think it's scandalous behavior.
You talked about one of the things that he said, weapons of war. He was talking in a campaign stop about, he was trying to talk about gun control.
Sure.
And he said, weapons of war I carried in war. I will say that the Harris-Walz campaign did say that the governor misspoke there.
Sure.
Do you accept that?
He misspoke. Another word is that he lied about it, and he didn't correct the record for 15 years until he was put under political pressure because I called it out, Dana. Whatever you want to...
I gotta give that one to JD. Point JD. Just saying.
Call it a misspeaking or a lie, I think Tim Walz should have to correct the record. Now, you pointed out a soldier who defended his service. There have been a number of soldiers who served with Tim Walz who have criticized him on the exact same grounds that I have because it's not right to misstate or to embellish what you've done, and I think that's what he did.
And on the question of when he left the National Guard, he filed his election paperwork February 10th, 2005. That was a month before the National Guard even announced that it was possible that they would deploy to Iraq, and it ended up being 2 months. He retired 2 months before they actually got the paperwork.
But on CNN last night, Dana, one of the people who was actually in charge of him said they knew they were going to deploy to Iraq in February of 2004, fall of 2004. So he knew he was going to Iraq. He decided to quit, to retire, whatever word you want to use.
Retire.
Because he wanted to run for Congress. He lied about that. He said that when he decided to retire, he did not know that he was going to Iraq. That is another untruth, as even his senior military officer said. So again, I'm not criticizing the service. I'm criticizing the dishonesty. Dishonesty spoken in favor and for the purpose of political benefit. And I think that the most important thing here, Dana, is it goes to Kamala Harris's judgment. Tim Walz is ultimately going to be the vice president. Kamala Harris is in great health. I'm sure she's going to be president if she wins for 4 or maybe even 8 years. Why did Kamala Harris choose a person who has lied about their military service? I think that is a serious lapse in judgment. And I don't want to hear from a campaign spokesperson of Kamala Harris. I want to hear Kamala Harris herself address what I just said.
You know, I've seen a lot of statements from veterans, including those you served with, saying it's just untoward to be criticizing somebody who served for 24 years.
Dana, I'm not interested in the ad hominem. I've heard from a lot of veterans groups who criticize Tim Walz. The question is, he said he served in war, and he didn't. That is a dishonesty. I couldn't care less what one or the other person says about it. I care about what the truth is. The truth is that Tim Walz didn't tell the truth. And importantly, Dana, this is about Kamala Harris's judgment. And I think that when you ask, why has Kamala Harris allowed the border to be wide open? Why has Kamala Harris supported policies that have promoted the increase in inflation? I think it goes to the heart of her judgment, and I think that that's what we should be talking about.
One last question. Donald Trump didn't serve in the military. He received a medical draft deferment for bone spurs to avoid serving in the Vietnam War, reportedly as a favor to his father. Do you find that shameful, too?
I think that Donald Trump didn't serve in the military, but he didn't lie about it, Dana. I've known Donald Trump for a long time. He really honors our veterans. He honors me for my service. Donald Trump didn't lie about serving in the military. He didn't say that he went to Vietnam when he didn't. This is the problem. I don't criticize anybody. Whether they served our country or not, I think it's honorable to serve, but obviously a lot of people have reasons for not serving. I criticize somebody for embellishing their record, for lying, saying, I went to war. Dana,
Okay, so you criticize him for that, but Trump gets a pass for literally avoiding any type of military service. You can't have it both ways. Like, I would respect JD more if he would be willing to admit, like, yes, I do have an issue with that area of Trump's record. I don't like that he didn't serve in the military, that he had these draft deferments, but I respect what he's doing now for our military, for the American people, the policies, the economy, and I feel like that's more important than the mistakes of his past. Why is that so hard for a politician to say? You lose credibility, actually, when you take this route right here. When you take the route of, oh yeah, I'm just going to act like, yeah, it doesn't really matter. Like, this is more important. He didn't lie about it. What he did was shameful, but at least he was honest about it. Like, you can't just give him a pass for that. You cannot do that. You can't just give him a pass for that. That's what JD's doing right here, and that's just as shameful as avoiding the draft with bone spurs. He didn't have bone spurs. You dodged the draft 5 times with the same injury. That's pretty crazy. And before you guys jump on me, I'm a military veteran, so I'm a talk whatever I want to talk on this topic. I served 6.5 years in the Air Force, got out as a staff sergeant. I did my time. So I'm not going to sit up here and like mince words on this topic here. I think it's absolutely shameful to dodge the draft 5 times. I also think it's shameful to lie about going to war. There's a lot of people who actually deployed. I never deployed. I will not lie about that. I never went to Afghanistan. I went to a lot of places. I did a lot of like TDYs, which are like shorter form deployments, go up to like a month in some cases. I did those. But I was never in the desert. And I'm not going to lie about that, because why lie about it? I was never in the desert. That doesn't make my military service less commendable. That doesn't make my military service less important. I did my job. I did it well. I did it to the best of my ability, and then I got out. So, like, I don't like the constant, like, question dodging. Like, she asked you a straight up question, is what he did shameful, yes or no? And you're avoiding it because you're saying, yeah, but he didn't lie. That's not acceptable. And Tim Walz, what you said, is also not acceptable. You did not serve in a war with a gun at your holster. You didn't. And saying that you misspoke, like, that's not going to work. Like JD Vance said, like, misspoke is another word for lie when it comes to politicians. So both of you are wrong.
Do you think that it's a problem that he said, I went to war, but he didn't actually? That seems to be a problem to me.
Well, they've corrected that. Let's move on to...
They've corrected it by admitting that he lied.
Let's move on to another important issue to voters.
And I also don't like how the journalist is handling that. Like, trying to quickly move on from that when JD has a point. I don't like that. Again, everybody in this situation is just... ugh. But that's why we're here. All my independent voters. That's why we're here. To build this community, to bask in the truth of what, is really going on. Because this is just too much, man. It's just too much of, like, dodging the truth and, like, dancing around the truth. Like, it's annoying. It's very, very annoying.
And that is the issue of abortion. You wrote the foreword for a new book by Heritage Foundation President Kevin Roberts.
Sure.
Of Project 2025. Project 2025, among many other things, calls for rolling back approval of the abortion drug mifepristone. Donald Trump told me during the debate that he would not block the drug. And on Thursday, when he was asked, he didn't rule it out. So which is it?
Well, look, Dana, first of all, Project 2025 is not affiliated with the Trump campaign. Kevin Roberts is a friend of mine, but I wouldn't say that he speaks for the president in the same way I wouldn't say that he speaks for me. Now, what Donald Trump has said is that he respects the Supreme Court's opinion on the mifepristone ruling.
But let me just stop you right there.
Please.
The Supreme Court, you're a lawyer, so you know this better than I.
Sure.
The Supreme Court, all they did was say that what came to them didn't have standing. So they let it stand. A real question, a substantive question, hasn't made it to the Supreme Court. So my question for you is whether or not a Trump-Vance administration would allow mifepristone to continue to be sent around the country.
Well, President Trump won the nomination of the Republican Party. He said it to you, and he said it repeatedly, that his goal is not to block mifepristone, it's to let states make the decision on abortion policy. Now, of course, that does mean, Dana, we have to be honest about this, that California might have less restrictive rules than Ohio, which might have less restrictive rules than Alabama. I think what President Trump is really trying to do on the abortion question is really admirable, and I wish the press was a little bit more honest about it. He's saying we've had a 50-year culture war over abortion, where unfortunately this issue has just divided the country, and he wants to provide some ground for us to come together, for states to make these decisions, for voters to make these decisions, and for us all to respect one another. That's all he's
on
proposed.
that issue, a few months ago, on the question, his position,
Yeah.
which you've adopted, is it is up to the states. I spoke to a woman named Kate Cox. She lives in Texas.
Sure.
She was 20 weeks pregnant. Her fetus was diagnosed with a disease called, it was a deadly genetic condition called trisomy 18. She said that carrying the pregnancy, she was told this by her doctors, to term, if the fetus even survived, would hurt her chances for having more children, which she and her husband desperately wanted. Why is not allowing her to end that pregnancy helpful or supportive of expanding families like you want it to be?
Well, first of all, Dana, my heart breaks for this woman. I don't know her personally. I've certainly heard the story, and our heart breaks for her. And we want people to have healthy, happy families. And it's extremely unfortunate that sometimes, medicine, the act of God, whatever happens, it just doesn't work out. And what the president has said, I think, very clearly, is that he is not trying to prevent women who have non-viable pregnancies from getting access to the medical care that they need.
But allowing the states to decide, a place like Texas, which has very strict laws now, doesn't allow a Kate Cox to end a pregnancy that is fatal and could potentially hurt her ability to have more kids.
But what President Trump has said is that we are going to let voters make these decisions. And again, Texas might have a view that President Trump disagrees with. They might have a view that President Trump agrees with, but you've got to let the voters make these decisions.
So you're comfortable with that law in Texas?
I'm not comfortable with anything, Dana, because I'm not passing judgment on what these laws should be. You ask me my own personal view. I campaigned against an Ohio referendum, but I think that we have to let voters decide. And when they speak their mind, you have to be respectful. Agree or disagree with whatever voters decide, they're going to make these decisions.
Welcome back to State of the Union. Here's more of my interview with GOP Vice Presidential nominee J.D. Vance.
John King is doing a project talking to voters all over swing states. He talked to Republican voters in the critical swing state, must win, I would say, swing state of Pennsylvania.
Of course. You love
One of
Pennsylvania.
them, Carol Carty, said she was almost a childless dog lady because she didn't happen to meet the right person until she was 40 years old. Another, Joan London, was offended that you don't think she has a stake in the future of the country because she doesn't have children. What do you say to key voters like that, Republicans, swing voters, who are put off by your views?
Well, what I would say, Dana, is if you look at what I said in context, the Harris campaign has frankly lied about what I actually said. I'm pro-family. I want us to have more families, and obviously sometimes it doesn't work out, sometimes for medical reasons, sometimes because you don't meet the right person. But the point is that our country has become anti-family in its public policy. Let me just give you an example of this. So after our second child was born, my wife and I, we have 3 little kids. After our second child was born, we get the baby home from the hospital. We get this ridiculous out-of-network medical bill that is financially shocking, and we're pretty well off. And that happened because we have ridiculous laws in this country that are anti-family. I've sponsored legislation to try to fix things like that so moms and dads don't get these surprise medical bills. I think it's important for us to be pro-family. That's all that I've ever said.
If you want to be pro-family, I want to, because you do criticize, as you just did, the Democratic Party for being anti-family.
I do.
You called out Kamala Harris and Pete Buttigieg in particular. Kamala Harris has 2 stepchildren. Pete Buttigieg and his husband have adopted twins. Do you recognize them as parents and more broadly as being part of families?
Well, of course I do, Dana. I mean, you know my life story. I was actually raised. I was raised, but Dana, I was raised. I mean, one of the first people that I gave a hug to after my RNC convention speech was my stepmom, who's been an incredibly important person in my life.
So she's not childless.
My kids call her Mamaw. Of course, she's not childless. But again,
you called her that.
The criticism. I certainly did not call my own stepmother childless.
Kamala Harris.
I criticized Kamala Harris for being part of a set of ideas that exists in American leadership that is anti-family. I never, Dana, criticized people for not having kids. I criticized people for being anti-child, and I do
That's not true. We literally have J.D. Vance captured on audio saying that people who don't have children are not invested in the future of this country. And the pushback on that has been, my personal pushback on that, and a lot of people's personal pushback on that is, okay, what about those 18-year-old kids that I served with in the Air Force who are single, no family, but don't they have an investment in the future of this country if they're serving in the armed forces? So again, you know, when you're a politician, when you have dreams of being a politician, man, you've got to be very, very careful about the things you say, how you say them, because everything that you say is liable to come back to bite you. Like if I were to run for office one day and somebody found this channel, I would need to be very, very careful about the things I say on this channel because they can all come back to bite me in the end. Every single one of the things that I said in every single video can come back to bite me. So you gotta, you can't just say things, you know, like. Now, to some voters, like him saying that, the childless cat ladies thing, they don't care because what they want to know is about the policies that you're going to bring forth. I mean, honestly, that's what I want to know about too. But I think what I've come to realize the more I've watched this stuff is that a lot of times the things that they say like that actually paints a very broad picture of how they're going to approach policy. So the stuff they say actually is very, very important.
Think that Kamala Harris has made some
anti-child?
bizarre statements. She has said things like it's reasonable not to have children over climate change. I think it's the exact opposite message we should be sending to our young families. I want to expand the child tax credit. I want to stop those surprise medical bills. I want to make housing more affordable so that if you have a young family, you can actually afford to put them in a home. And I think that it is unfortunate that so much of our public leadership has become anti-family. One final point on this, Dana, if you go back to the COVID era, one thing that really frustrated me and motivated some of these comments is we were at a point where we were kicking kids out of school. We were masking 3-year-olds and putting the masks back on them, even as they were trying to rip them off at school. I think that if we had more people who took the right perspective and had a little bit more understanding of how little kids actually operate, we would not have made so many of those mistakes during COVID.
That's a whole nother conversation because
No,
people
it's
didn't
related to
know.
this
No, because people didn't know as much because it was literally a novel virus.
But Dana, you asked me about you've now asked me 3 questions about comments that I made 3 years ago. I wonder what Kamala Harris thinks about the fact that she supported policies that opened the American southern border. I wonder what Kamala Harris thinks about the fact that she lied to the American people about Joe Biden's middle facility for the office. You are interviewing me, Dana, because I respect the American people enough to sit down for an interview.
I appreciate that.
Kamala Harris has been the nominee for 3 weeks. She hasn't sat down for a real interview.
Believe me, we are asking. You're not going to get a disagreement there.
But the point is, Dana, you've got me for 15 minutes or however long you have me. We should be talking about public policies that matter. How are we going to lower inflation? How are we going to reduce the cost of food and housing? How are we going to close down that southern border? We've talked so little about that. We've talked a lot more about a sarcastic remark I made 3 years ago. I think we should talk about the issues that most Americans care about.
I only asked you one question about that. I asked you about policies, and I was asking about the military record that you brought up, nobody else did, of Tim Walz. One last question. This is on policy.
Please.
the Federal Reserve.
Yeah.
Donald Trump said this week that he feels strongly that the president should have at least a say when it comes to the Federal Reserve and how to handle interest rates. Do you agree that a president should direct the Federal Reserve on how to handle interest rates?
Well, not direct. That's not what he said. He said the president should have a say. But one, I absolutely agree with what he said.
Right now,
And
the president
two,
doesn't have a say.
Well, the president has a say in the sense that the president appoints the Federal
Right.
Reserve governors. But he's saying, to be clear, President Trump is saying, I think, something that's really important and actually profound, which is that the political leadership of this country should have more say over the monetary policy of this country. I agree with him. That should fundamentally be a political decision. Agree or disagree, we should have America's elected leaders having input about the most important decisions confronting our country.
That would
The question
be a
to go-
huge change, just so people understand
It
that.
would be a huge change, but whether the country goes to war, what our interest rates are, these are important questions that American democracy should have important answers for. And I think all President Trump is saying is that, look, it's kind of weird that you have so many bureaucrats making so many important decisions. If the American people don't like our interest rate policy, they should elect somebody different to change that policy. Nothing should be above democratic debate in this country when it comes to the big questions confronting the United States.
Okay, one last question.
Please.
And I can't believe I have to ask you this, but I do, because Donald Trump has been attacking Kamala Harris's racial identity.
He has not been,
He-
but ask your question.
Well,
That's literally like, how do you look at this woman dead in her face and say he hasn't been doing the one thing that he has been doing? Everyone's seen it. Everyone's seen him attacking her racial identity, saying that she turned black. Like, you can't. It would be so much easier. It'd be so much better, actually, for a politician to just, I guess, try to create a legitimate reason why he would do that rather than say he didn't do that. Because now you're questioning our intelligence. We all, anybody who saw that NABJ interview, we all heard it. We've all heard the soundbite at this point. So you can't sit here and tell us that that didn't happen when it did.
questioned her racial identity. He said a number of years ago she happened to turn black. Her father is Jamaican. Do you believe Kamala Harris is black?
I believe that Kamala Harris is whatever she says she is, but I believe importantly that President Trump is right that she's a chameleon. She pretends to be one thing in front of one audience. She pretends to be something different in front of another audience. Look, Dana, she's not running a political campaign. She's running a movie. She only speaks to voters behind a teleprompter. Everything is scripted. She doesn't have her policy positions out there. She hasn't answered why she wanted to ban fracking, but now she doesn't. She wanted to fund police, but now she doesn't. She wanted to open the border, but now she doesn't. She should have to answer for why she presents a different set of policies to one audience and a different set of policies to another audience. And I think that's what President Trump is getting at. This is a fundamentally fake person. She's different depending on who she's in front of.
With respect, you
Please.
changed your position on an important thing, which is Donald Trump.
Of course I did.
You-
And
so
I'm
why are
honest
you not a
about it.
chameleon?
Because, Dana, I've explained to the American people what's different. People change their minds when the facts change, they should. But if you want to be the people's vice president or president, you should have to stand before an interviewer and say, this is why I changed my mind. So to everybody who's seen that I criticized Donald Trump, since he asked the question, here are two things.
You didn't just
about-
criticize him. You said he could be America's Hitler.
Well, that's a criticism, and I didn't say that exactly, but set that to the side. What I said about Donald Trump and what I believed about Donald Trump, two things that really changed. First of all, I didn't think Donald Trump would be a good president. He was a great president. Wages were rising. The world was more peaceful. Remember, when Donald Trump was running for president the first time, they said he would start World War III. He brought more peace to the world than any president of my lifetime. The second thing, Dana, is I believed, and I'm ashamed of it, I believed a lot of the media lies about Donald Trump in 2016. I believe that he said things like, for example, the media said Donald Trump accused all Mexicans of being rapists and criminals. You actually look at what he said, he did not say that at all. And I think it's important when you see something, you change your mind, and that's all I've done. And my pitch to the American people would be, I imagine a lot of folks who are thinking about voting for Donald Trump in 2024, maybe they've bought in to the media lies about him. Think for yourself, look at what he actually said, and I think you'll find that he's, one, a very engaging guy, but two, was a very good president.
I will give this to JD Vance. There's been a lot of quotes from Donald Trump that I have looked at. After looking at the small excerpt, that the media gives, I have looked at some of the stuff that Trump says. For example, the comments about, Mexicans being, rapists and murderers and stuff like that. I looked at the full quote and I'm like, okay, he still could have phrased this better, but I can see how he didn't really mean to say that exactly. Again, when you're a politician, you got to be better. Like, you have to phrase this stuff better. It's very important that you are selective with your words. Trump is like way too loose with his words a lot of the time, so you never really know what he means. So you can't blame people for taking what he says and spinning it in the way that they want to, because he's never very direct and clear with what he's saying. It's always a bunch of lip flab, extra words that don't need to be said, and his main message can get lost in what he's saying because he's using too many words to get there. So if he finds a way to get himself more clear and concise, he might be able to start winning over some more voters.
There aren't media lies. We play him and we let him speak for himself, and so people are getting exactly.
I'm not accusing you of lying, Dana. You know I like you, but
no,
the
I know
media
you're
lies
not.
from time to time
I know you're
about
not, but
Donald Trump.
people hear him for himself. Last question.
Please.
Are you going to debate Tim Walz?
Of course. I want to debate Tim Walz. I think it's important, and I think that it goes to a very fundamental difference between the Trump-Vance ticket and our opposition. We believe in talking to the media. We believe in answering questions. We believe in debating. I think it's really important. I mean, look, I'm asking the American people to make me their vice president. It's really important to stand before the American people to make that case, and I'm going to keep on doing it in whatever forum I get the opportunity. So
we look forward to it. Thank you so much for
Dana.
sitting down and taking my questions.
Of course. Thank you.
You know, I will give them credit again. Like, Trump and JD have been taking press conferences. That's something Kamala Harris and Tim Walz have not been doing. I don't know why, but they just have not been doing that so far, and it would really be beneficial to the American people if they decide to go ahead and start doing that. Like, I think that's very important. So the next one that we're going to take a look at is from Face the Nation. Face the Nation did an interview.
Well, thank you.
26 minutes. This should be great. Okay. 26-minute interview. Let's get right into it. We got a lot of content to go through here. We got this one and one more from ABC News. So let's see what Face the Nation on CBS has to say in this JD Vance interview.
Well, thank you for having us out here to Ohio. You know, President Trump has said you are outstanding, but when you look at what decides elections, the vice presidential pick rarely matters. How are you going to prove him wrong?
Well, I think President Trump's right about that, actually. I think most people were voting for Donald Trump or for Kamala Harris. Donald Trump delivered rising wages and a secure border. Kamala Harris has delivered an open border and falling wages relative to inflation and groceries and housing and so forth. So I think that he's actually right, that most people, when they cast their ballots, they're basing it based on who the presidential nominee is, not the vice presidential nominee. It's just straightforward political reality, and I think Donald Trump's right.
So you are there to deliver some of the punches?
Well, I'm there to help define our opposition a little bit. I think that, unfortunately, Kamala Harris has run a campaign where every time she's in front of voters, a teleprompter is in between. She doesn't really talk to the media, like, at all. She hasn't answered, I think, a single tough question from a reporter. So, yeah, one of my jobs is to get out there and just make sure the American people know that this is a person who supported open borders, who suspended deportations, who stopped the Remain in Mexico policy that kept a lot of Americans safe. And, of course, my job is to help govern once we actually get elected. But I think, again, most people are voting for Donald Trump or for Kamala Harris. That's just the way it is.
So let's talk about the vision for the country that you're offering. You supported the Supreme Court ruling recently on mifepristone, the so-called abortion pill, that ruled opponents lacked the legal right to sue over the FDA approval.
That's right.
This drug is used in like 60% of all abortions in the United States. In a Trump-Vance administration, would you use the FDA to block access to this drug?
Well, no. What the president has said very clearly is that abortion policy should be made by the states, right? You, of course, want to make sure that any medicine is safe, that it's prescribed in the right way, and so forth. But the president wants individual states to make these decisions because, look, Margaret, California is going to have a different abortion policy from Ohio, which is going to have a different abortion policy from Alabama.
But that was actually different because after Dobbs, the Supreme Court took up this case.
Yeah, but like you said,
they viewed it as different.
Sure, but like you said, on a matter of legal standing, but I think that what we really want is when states and voters in those states make decisions, we of course want the states and the federal government to respect those decisions, and that's what President Trump has said, is consistently we need to get out of the culture war side of the abortion issue. We need to let the states decide their specific abortion policy, and look, what President Trump and I want to do on family policy is make it easier for families to start in the first place. We want to bring down housing costs so that if you have a baby, there's actually a place to raise that baby. We want to increase and expand the child tax credit. We want to make it easier for moms and dads to not be shocked by these surprise medical bills when they go to an out-of-network provider. We're working on all this stuff, and I think that's ultimately how we turn down the temperature a little bit, is to make it easier to choose life in the first place. Because when you talk to women, you talk to moms and dads, a lot of times they feel like if you have a pregnancy, especially an unexpected pregnancy, there just aren't options. We want to provide more options so that people are raising families in a thriving and happy way in this country.
So at his presser this past week, Donald Trump seemed to indicate he was open to restrictions on mifepristone. He was asked by a reporter about this, and he said there are many things on a humane basis that you can do, but also give a vote. So he did seem to be indicating he's open to restrictions on this particular drug.
Look, I think what he said...
Are you saying that's wrong?
Well, I think what he said, Margaret, is, first of all, even some of the reporters who were in the room at that press conference said it wasn't clear what the reporter was asking. Maybe he couldn't hear that person super clearly. So I don't want to put words in President Trump's mouth. What he has said very clearly in the debate is that he agrees with the Supreme Court decision, but more importantly, he wants these decisions to be made by the states. I think that is the President Trump vision for the Republican Party.
Because you personally signed on as a senator to a letter to the DOJ demanding it shut down all mail order abortion operations under the Comstock Act. So would you seek to enforce that law differently?
Well, what we said in that letter, Margaret, is that we want doctors to prescribe this stuff to ensure that it's safe. I mean, we do this with antibiotics, we do this with a lot of antidepressants, and we just want the FDA to make sure that doctors are prescribing this in a safe way. That's all that we ever said, and I believe that that is how President Trump feels about this, is again, you want the states to make these determinations. You also want to make sure the FDA is ensuring that these medications are safe for anybody who's taken them.
It's been on the market for decades, and the FDA does say it is safe, but
antibiotics are safe, but we want to make sure they're prescribed by doctors and that doctors are properly monitoring this stuff so that people don't get hurt. And
of course,
Margaret, we've talked now, for 6 questions about abortion.
I'm still trying to get a clear answer. So for an FDA commissioner that you would be part of choosing, where that commissioner stands on this drug, would that determine whether or not they are chosen to be put in this key role?
I think President Trump has clearly said there are no litmus tests on this particular issue. He just wants to make sure that drugs are safe and effective before they're out there in the market. And of course, that doctors are properly controlling this stuff so that people don't get hurt. And again, Margaret, I mean, we talk about abortion. I think President Trump's views on abortion are extremely clear. What's interesting, of course, is that President Trump is trying to find some common ground on this issue. And you have Democrats who have supported abortion right up to the moment and sometimes even beyond the moment of birth, which is just sick stuff. And I think it's such a contrast.
That's not accurate.
It is accurate. In fact, the Born Alive Act, multiple members of the current Democratic administration, including our vice president, support.
Oh, wow. This one. Okay, so CBS does a live fact check here. Some of you aren't going to trust it. If you're Trump supporters, that's fine. Whatever. Look, independent voters, we're here. We're here. Now, there's going to be a lot of voters from both sides that come into this comment section and tell me that this fact checking is BS and whatever. Whatever, dude. Whatever. At the end of the day, whoever's reporting on this stuff knows more than I do. And the fact check here says Harris did not support the Born Alive Act. Born Alive Act sounds crazy.
Supported that legislation. They have supported taxpayer-funded abortions up to the moment of birth. I just think it's bizarre, and you contrast it to Donald Trump, who's trying to find some common ground on this issue. What he's trying to do...
Well, actually, he's saying send it back to the states so he doesn't have to stake out a position
so
on
that
this.
So that the states, Margaret, that's an important part of our federal process, is that states sometimes are going to make these decisions for themselves, and I think that's how you find some common ground.
But on that, you were saying both that it should be doctors who determine the safety of a drug, but also that states should determine the availability of that drug. Do I have that right?
Well, no, that states are going to determine their abortion policy, and of course doctors are going to determine the safety of drugs.
And if 60% are through medication abortion, it brings us back to the pill. That's why I was asking you that.
Well, but again, states are going to make these decisions. I'm actually confused a little bit by the question, Margaret, because if Alabama, let's say, is going to have a different abortion policy from California, that's not inconsistent with then saying doctors are going to have to prescribe this stuff, whatever the individual policy of the state is. I'm not sure what the confusion is there.
I don't know. President Trump said there are some humane things that could be done in addition to the
again,
vote.
in a loud room where he couldn't hear the question super well, but I think his view on this has been very clear, and I've just articulated it.
We want to clarify what Senator Vance said about the Born Alive Survivors Protection Act and his claim that Vice President Harris supported the legislation. A CBS News fact check finds Harris voted against advancing the bill twice when she was the senator and has previously called it extreme and a setback to reproductive rights in America. We found no evidence that anyone who currently serves in the Biden administration voted for it either. Here's more of our interview. So let me talk, you talked about family policy, so I have some specific questions for you on that. You've been talking about the concern about the low birth rate in the United States of America, which is well documented. You said people without children should pay higher tax rates than those who have children, and the U.S. should look at lowering income tax rates on women who have multiple children, and you pointed to Hungary as a model for that. How do you plan to implement that policy?
Well, it's called the child tax credit, and we should expand the child tax credit. If you think about what the child tax credit does...
So you and the Biden administration agree on the child care tax credit?
Well, we think it should be bigger. I think President Trump and I believe in an expanded child tax credit, but we also, importantly, want to actually get this thing done. The child tax credit has languished, thanks to the Biden administration, because Harris has failed to show fundamental leadership. Chuck Schumer's been unable to get it through the United States Senate, and we want to have a more pro-family policy. Now,
there was just a vote on this, you know that.
Well, let's.
And you weren't there.
But Margaret,
it was a messaging bill. I'll give you that.
It was a show vote.
I'm with you on that.
And if I had been there, it would have failed.
So
and
tell me specifically what you want to do to expand the child care tax credit, because it's like $2,000 per kid right now.
Well, I think one of the things that you can do is make it bigger per child. I think we'd love to see it at a higher dollar value. And again, President Trump and I have proposed that. I mean, look, I'd love to see a child tax credit that's $5,000 per child, but you of course have to work with Congress to see how possible and viable that is. We've also proposed legislation, Margaret, to end this practice of parents getting these surprise medical bills where they go to the hospital, they have a baby, they chose an out-of-network provider, and they come home with unexpected bills. I've actually sponsored legislation to end that practice. So we have a whole host of pro-family policies that are out there. And again, on the Harris administration, I got to push back against something a little bit, Margaret, because when these comments where I said parents should pay lower taxes via the child tax credit came out, the Harris administration immediately jumped and said, we disagree with this. The Harris campaign said, we disagree with this. So did they want the elimination of the child tax credit, or were they just being careless in responding to remarks that I made 3 years ago? I don't know. They should clarify it, maybe in an interview with you, but of course Kamala Harris refuses to do interviews with anybody.
Well, we hope to have her on and ask her about that. So the child care tax rate, you said $5,000 per child is what you would like to get to. Where would that kick in? Because the current one, if income is $400,000 or below, it's $2,000 per child. So where would the $5,000 per child kick in?
I'd like to have a broad-based family policy and a broad-based child tax credit, Margaret. Again, we've talked about doing this for a long time. President Trump has been on the record for a long time supporting a bigger child tax credit. And I think you want it to apply to all American families. I don't think that you want this massive cutoff for lower income families, which you have right now. You don't want a different policy for higher income families. You just want to have a pro-family child tax credit.
So you have personally opposed universal child care. How do you solve the child care crisis in America?
Well, what I've opposed is one model of child care. We, of course, want to give everybody access to child care, but look, in my family, I grew up in a poor family where the child care was my grandparents. Right. And a lot of these child care proposals do nothing for grandparents. If you look at some of these proposals, they do nothing for stay-at-home moms or stay-at-home dads. I want us to have a child care policy that's good for all families, not just a particular model of family, and that's what I've said.
So what do you mean by that? There would be like a credit per kid if it's a stay-at-home mom, credit per kid if it's grandma.
Yeah, exactly.
They get a check
to
take care of
that's exactly what I propose. Now, that's exactly what we've proposed both publicly and I've talked about doing privately. I'm just saying that I don't want us to favor one family model over another. If you've got grandparents who are at home taking care of the kids, I think they deserve to be treated the same way as other family models by their government.
Gay families, they'd be included. All families.
All families would be included,
Okay.
of course. All families would be included.
So I was looking at the platform, the Trump-Vance platform that was rolled out at the RNC. You talk about school choice, you talk about 529 savings accounts. What about really young kids? Should 3- and 4-year-old kids have access to preschool?
Well, look, I think that certainly some families are going to choose that, but again, some families are going to choose grandparents and so forth. I think our view...
Well, that's childcare. That's different than
our
preschool.
view... Well, very often preschool is childcare, is at least a form of childcare. I know that when I went to preschool,
Your kids
my parents
went to preschool.
Yeah, and we used it as childcare, right? You're hoping the kids get a good education, but you're also doing it because you want to provide childcare for your kids. I don't think there's anything incongruous or inconsistent about that. And I think, look, we believe that we want to make it easier for American families, Margaret, to make their own choices on this stuff. When we talk about school choice, of course, school choice would apply to all families. It would apply to all parents. And we would just want parents to have choices.
Including for preschool, because in many public school systems, there is no preschool. That's why I'm asking.
I think that we want parents to have choices, Margaret. Like I just said, we want them to be able to make the choices that make the most sense for their family. For some, it's going to be preschool. For some, it's going to be daycare. For some, it's going to be having the kids stay at home a little bit longer. We just want the government to treat everybody equally, regardless of whatever education or family model you have.
So you have a very young family.
I do.
You have a very accomplished wife, Usha, who she went to.
I'm very proud of her.
Yes, Yale, Cambridge. She clerked at the Supreme Court. We heard her on stage at the RNC. You gave a recent interview to Megyn Kelly.
Yeah.
And you spoke about white supremacists attacking your family.
Sure.
Because she's not a white person. How concerned are you that this kind of hate would follow you to the White House?
Well, look, it's going to follow us wherever we go because that's the nature of public life in America, and it's disgraceful. Look, I love my wife. I'm very proud of her. I'm extremely lucky to have met her and to have gotten the chance to build a life with her. And my attitude on this is if people want to attack me, attack my policy views, they're welcome to. I signed up for it. My wife didn't sign up for it, and by the way, she's way out of their league, the people who are attacking her. So I wish they would just keep their mouths shut or at least focus on me. But look, it's the nature of public life in this country. My wife's pretty tough, and she knows what we signed up for.
I imagine it's hard to keep your temper when you hear things like that.
Yeah, I get pissed off sometimes, certainly. When people attack your family, and certainly attack your family for something that no person can control. And I do think that there's been this thing in America where we've said that we should judge people based on their skin color, based on their immutable characteristics, based on things that they can't control. I frankly think that, unfortunately, a lot of people on the left have leaned into this by trying to categorize people by skin color and then give special benefits or special amounts of discrimination. The Harris administration, for example, handed out farm benefits to people based on skin color. I think that's disgraceful. I don't think we should say you get farm benefits if you're a black farmer, you don't get farm benefits if you're a white farmer. All farmers we want to thrive, and that's certainly the President Trump and J.D. Vance view of the situation. But I do think, unfortunately, when our leaders divide us by race, you're going to have hate on the left side of the political spectrum, you're going to have hate on the right side of the political spectrum. We should just judge people based on individual characteristics and based on merit, and that's certainly what President Trump and I want to do.
But that wasn't born in the last 4 years. I mean,
not at all. But I think that President Biden and Harris have certainly accelerated it. I don't think you've seen anything like what we've seen from Kamala Harris when it comes to handing out government benefits based on people's immutable characteristics. The actual legal enshrinement of discrimination in this country, we haven't seen anything like it in the last 30 or 40 years. Certainly back in the 60s and 50s, we all look at that as a period that we wanted to get away from, and in some ways the Harris administration has re-implemented it. I think it's pretty disgraceful.
Well, in your own movement, that's what I want to ask about, because one of the supremacists who was saying things like this about your family, Nick Fuentes, an avowed anti-Semite, went after your wife. He had previously dined at Mar-a-Lago with Donald Trump. Does this have any room in your movement, in the MAGA movement?
Of course it doesn't have any room in the MAGA movement, and of course...
You disavow him and this.
And of course Donald Trump has criticized this person. Look, I think the guy's a total loser. Certainly I disavow him, but if you ask me what I care more about, is it a person attacking me personally, or is it government policy that discriminates based on race? That's what I really worry about, is bad government policy that harms people based on their immutable characteristics. look, a lot of losers are going to attack me and attack my family. I think the proper response to them is to ignore them, don't feed the trolls, and they largely go away. What I worry much more about is bad government policy, Margaret, because I think it's a bad thing.
I want to ask you about some of the things you said on the business front.
Yeah.
You said you're among the most pro-labor Republicans in the Senate. You're not a big fan of right-to-work laws that make it harder to, for unions to organize. Our latest CBS poll shows your ticket is down 13 points, 56 to 43, among voters with a union member in their household. Why do you think there is this differential? Why behind?
Well, first of all, Margaret, I'm skeptical of any polling at this level because I think that you have to persuade voters. The poll that actually matters is on Election Day. And I think we're doing great with union voters, especially people.
You can say that. Because, yes, that's the ultimate polling that's going to really matter at the end of the day. But there's a reason that you campaign the way that you do. There's a reason why there's a campaign strategy. And it's all based on the polling that you receive throughout the duration of the campaign. You don't just go into campaigning blindly. You use the polling as a measuring stick for what you need to do. So you can't use it, but then say it doesn't matter when you're put in front of a camera, when it's at a disadvantage. Because former President Donald Trump talks all the time about, oh, I'm ahead in the polls, I'm ahead in this, I'm ahead in that. But how is it that the polling only matters when you're winning, but it doesn't matter when you're losing? But I will give JD Vance this. He has done so many press conferences and interviews at this point, and he's done it in front of people who he knows are gonna toss him very fastball questions. These aren't curveball middle of the plate. This is 100 miles per hour up and in kind of questions that he's being asked with, but he's taken all the interviews, so I can't do anything but respect that and wonder, like he's saying, where's Kamala? Where's Tim Walz? Walz, not Waltz, JD. Walz. Where are they? Why aren't they doing any interviews? Why aren't they doing any press conferences? I want to hear from them. I want to hear from them on subjects like the economy, subjects like Israel-Gaza, subjects like the border, subjects like the rent, mortgage, all that stuff. I want to hear from them on that stuff too. So, like I said, I have to have a certain level of respect for just the willingness to go in front of the camera and, do these interviews. But, at the same time, he's asked some questions and he gives some really bad answers sometimes. So we don't really know, is this hurting him or helping him in the Trump campaign? We don't know.
People like the Teamsters, the United Auto Workers, because we're the people who are trying to protect their jobs. Kamala Harris has pursued a series of green energy policies that would ship more and more manufacturing jobs to China, more and more energy jobs to China. That's going to destroy a lot of union jobs. And what President Trump and I have to do is make the case to these workers, union and non-union alike, that we're the candidacy, we're the presidency that's actually going to protect their jobs and protect their right to earn a good wage in the country they love. I think that when people know about the policy difference between Kamala Harris, pro-shipping American manufacturing jobs to China with ridiculous energy policies, and Donald Trump, who wants to drill and actually open up American energy markets so that we can manufacture more, they're going to vote for President Trump. I have no doubt about that.
You're one of the few Republican supporters of antitrust reform.
Yeah.
Which has actually been a cause the Biden-Harris administration has taken up here, trying to block mergers and ramp up antitrust. You said of FTC Commissioner Lina Khan, she's done a pretty good job.
Yeah.
What do you mean by that? If you're in office, you're going to go after trying to break up Google, trying to break up Microsoft. What does that mean?
Well, look, I don't agree with Lina Khan on every issue, to be clear, but I think that she's been very smart about trying to go after some of these big tech companies that monopolize what we're allowed to say in our own country. I don't want a billionaire.
Which companies?
I don't want Google or a billionaire that controls Google that's in bed with China to be able to censor American information, and that's exactly what they've done. I think these companies are too big, too powerful.
And he's a huge supporter of your movement.
But he does not
and he does
censor.
so much business with China.
One, he does not censor, and two, he does not have a monopoly over free speech in a way that Google has a much, much bigger company, a much more powerful control. And by the way, the presidency that started the antitrust lawsuit against Google was Donald J. Trump's presidency, right? So in a lot of ways, President Trump and I look at this in the same way. We want good wages for American workers. We want Americans to be able to speak their own mind in their own country. And sometimes that means you've got to take on those monopolies. President Trump already did it. And I think he'll do it again if we give him another chance.
It just stands out as interesting to me because you courted so much money effectively for the campaign from Silicon Valley and from so many of these
Not from
tech
Google and Facebook, Margaret. I think there's a big difference between big tech and little tech, right? A lot of these companies are upstarts. They're trying to build a cool product. They're trying to take on the Googles and Facebooks of the world. Google and Facebook are not giving me a whole lot of money because they don't like me, because I believe that Americans ought to be able to speak their own mind in their own country. And I think these companies are too big. We ought to take the Teddy Roosevelt approach to some of them, break them up, don't let them control what people are allowed to say. So yes, the big tech companies don't like me. The little tech companies, people I think who are trying to do something important to take on those big tech incumbents, yeah, a lot of them do support me, and I'm of course proud to have their support because we agree on a lot of big issues.
So you're promising them less regulation of certain things? Is that what
you're promising? Who?
Small tech. You didn't give any names, so I don't know.
Well, look, I mean, I think Twitter, for example, if you look at its user base and you look at how much control Google has over the digital advertising infrastructure, we ought to be going after some of those incumbents. And certainly, I don't think that Elon Musk has any monopoly. He's not using his company to try to destroy competitors. And that, to me, is when something crosses the line where you've got to be a little bit more focused on antitrust issues.
We're going to mark this year the 3-year anniversary of the end of the U.S. war in Afghanistan.
Yeah.
President Trump negotiated that withdrawal.
Sure.
The execution you've been very critical of as very chaotic under President Biden. But let's look at what you could do if you're in office. There are about 80,000 or so Afghans who were left behind, many of whom worked for the United States. Does America owe them? Should you bring them here?
Well, I think that we should bring people here who helped us and have been properly vetted, and that's very, very important because a lot of the people the Biden administration has brought in have not been properly vetted.
Are you talking about Afghan vets?
And I think the most important, certainly the Biden administration has let in Afghan nationals who say that they supported Americans but actually did not. We also remember, Margaret, there was a lot when we were in Afghanistan, a lot of so-called blue on green or green on blue violence where people who were allegedly supposed to help us killed American troops. So I want them in our country? Of course I don't. In fact, I wish they weren't on this earth anymore. So we have to be careful about who we let into this country.
I'm talking about people who worked alongside United States service people
and if they're
on the ground in Afghanistan.
And if they're properly vetted, I think that we should help them. Some of them don't want to come here, by the way, Margaret. Some of them would like us to give them safety in another country. You don't have to bring every single person who helped the United States into the United States. You can send them to other places as well, but certainly I don't think we should abandon anybody who's been properly vetted and actually helped us.
I ask you that because President Trump said a few days ago he'll suspend refugee admissions to the United States.
Exactly, because we're not properly...
But you're saying not in this case.
No, absolutely I'm saying in this case, Margaret, because we're not properly vetting the people that are being let in through these refugee programs. What President Trump said is very important. You cannot show up at an American consulate and say, I helped the Americans, go let me into America because I'm a refugee.
That's not how the process works, you know that.
It very often is how the process works, Margaret. The Biden administration has been scandalous in not properly vetting these people. Donald Trump is exactly right. And again, just because they helped us, allegedly, doesn't mean you have to let them come to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Maybe some of them should go to other countries. Maybe we should help some of them in their own country. And President Trump's exactly right about this. In fact, we know beyond a shadow of doubt that some of the people who have been led into this country are on the terrorist watch list. That is disgraceful.
I think
Trump
now
is
you're
right that we should
conflating
stop
a few different things. You are now talking about people who have come in through the southern border versus people who were vetted and worked with U.S. intelligence.
We've certainly let in people through refugee resettlement who should not be in this country. Absolutely we have. We have not properly vetted everybody who's come in.
Do you have something that you've been briefed on?
Certainly, if you look
a
at
specific example that you're worried about?
I have been briefed privately, but there's also been public reports of people who have come in through the refugee resettlement process who are actually on some kind of terrorism watch list, who importantly were not actually helping Americans, even though they claimed. We got to be careful, Margaret. We have a country to protect, and I have 3 young children. I don't want people walking around the streets of this country who said they served the United States, but because the Biden administration doesn't believe in immigration enforcement, they didn't properly vet them.
But you would properly vet them and allow them in if you're in the White House?
No, I didn't say that. I said let everybody in. No, I think you want to help them.
I didn't say everyone. I said specifically Afghans.
I say you want to help them. Maybe they want to resettle in their own country. Maybe they want to resettle in another country. What I've said is I do think that we should help the people who were good to us. That doesn't mean every single one of them has to come to the United States of America.
Okay.
Right?
I'm being wrapped, but I really want to ask you about China, if you're game.
Yeah.
Okay. So do you view China as a competitor or an adversary?
I think they're both. Right? And I think that what we want to do here is build the kind of international order where we can check China. We don't want to go to war with China, but certainly they're an adversary. I mean, they know, for example, the Chinese know that they're manufacturing tons of fentanyl they're letting come into our country. Kamala Harris has done nothing about this. She should apply diplomatic and economic leverage over the Chinese to stop manufacturing this fentanyl, which then comes into the Mexican drug cartels, which they then ship into our country.
The United States has designated some of these groups
this is a
and pressed
scandal.
the Chinese government.
Oh, we could do so much more. Fentanyl is not easy to manufacture, Margaret. And if Harris was applying proper leverage to the Chinese and to the Mexican drug cartels, we would not have so many people dying of fentanyl overdoses.
How do you do that? What's your vision of how you do that?
I think you walk into Beijing, you talk to Xi Jinping, and you say your entire economy is going to collapse unless you get access to American markets. You need to take this fentanyl seriously, or we are going to impose serious tariffs and economic penalties for not following our laws and not helping us stem the flow of this deadly poison.
And you wouldn't be worried about blowback on the U.S. economy?
I think that we have a powerful economy, Margaret, with the best workers in the entire world. If we need to fight a trade war with the Chinese, we will fight it and we will win it. But we cannot do what Kamala Harris has done, which is be so terrified of using the economic power that we have that she's not even willing to stop the flow of this deadly poison coming into our country.
President Trump said Vladimir Putin and Chinese President Xi were lovely individuals when he was speaking in Montana last night. You agree with that characterization?
I think that President Trump gets along with world leaders, and there's nothing wrong with him complimenting them as people if it makes him more effective diplomatically. And there's an irony here.
That's different than walking in and laying down the law to Xi Jinping.
Oh, no, it's not actually, because you're better able to lay down the law like President Trump did if you actually have a good relationship with people and they trust you to follow your word. We have to remember that Democrats, including Kamala Harris, attacked Donald Trump for having a good relationship with Vladimir Putin. Well, when Donald Trump was president, Vladimir Putin didn't invade another country. When Kamala Harris was vice president, he did. So maybe they should take a lesson from Trump's playbook about diplomatic legitimacy, because I think Donald Trump got a lot done because world leaders respected him.
I'll say he has a point there. He has a point there about the world leaders, about how China and Russia were behaving around the time that he was in office, as opposed to Kamala Harris and Joe Biden. So I can't really give big pushback on that. I do agree with him as well that if you have good relationships with world leaders, it probably does make it a lot easier to get things done diplomatically. So I don't know, it's a complex issue, right? Like, it's not black and white. A lot of the answers that you'll get from politicians are very black and white. But I love the question that she asked, like, okay, so what's your plan? What's your plan to fix? I've been waiting for these reporters to ask all these politicians that. When Kamala Harris and Tim Walz sit down and take questions, I want them to ask the exact same questions. Okay, so how? How do you plan on doing this? You're talking a big game, but how do you plan on doing it? Like, tell me what are the steps? What is your plan? What is your process? So we have one more, which comes from ABC News. So we'll get into that one. All right, let's get into the last interview. This one with ABC News, who Trump also doesn't like. So we'll see if this one is kind to JD Vance.
What a difference a few weeks makes. Before President Biden dropped out of the presidential race, that was 3 weeks ago today, Democrats were discouraged. Republicans were on a roll, and it looked like Donald Trump was well on his way to winning back the White House. Now, a new New York Times Siena poll of the battleground states likely to determine who will win shows that the Kamala Harris-Tim Walz ticket has the momentum.
Now, I know there's Trump supporters who keep telling me New York Times isn't a reputable source. Oh, they're biased, they're this, they're that. Data is data, man. You can't just fake data, so do with that what you will. I mean, you guys can call it fake all you want. We'll see come November. That's pretty much my stance on it.
Leading Trump Vance by 4 points among likely voters in Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. That's a dramatic change after what the Times is calling the worst 3 weeks of Donald Trump's 2024 campaign. After a rough start as Trump's running mate, J.D. Vance is now leading the Republican effort to define the Harris-Walz ticket and to regain the momentum. I caught up with him this weekend at his home state of Ohio. We started with the state of the race. Thank you for joining us, Senator Vance. So,
thanks for being here.
I saw Kamala Harris said that she's the underdog in this race. Is that the way you see it? I mean, are you guys still the front runners here?
Look, I think that we are going to have a very tight election, John, and that we just have to sprint to the finish line. We have about 88 days to actually persuade the American people that President Trump should be their president and be their vice president. And I think you just take nothing for granted. You don't believe any polls, whether the ones that are good for you or bad for you. You just try to persuade people as much as you can, and the chips are going to fall where they are.
But Trump seems to think that he's got a huge lead. I mean, you said this at the press conference. He suggested it could be a landslide looking at polls. Do you tell him that you need to kind of like temper expectations?
I think President Trump is extremely confident. Look, I'm extremely confident. I think we're going to win. I also think that we have to work as hard as possible for the remainder of the election to try to persuade Americans to vote for us. That's the name of the game. But yeah, look, do I think President Trump is actually as confident as he pretends to be in public? Yes, he actually is. But we still have to work very hard.
So there's been a lot of talk about racism and whatnot. You faced some really nasty stuff. I saw this thing that Nick Fuentes, of course, he's an avowed white supremacist. He said, what kind of a man marries somebody named Usha? Clearly he doesn't value his racial identity, his heritage. I mean, this is racist garbage.
Yes, it is.
But this is also a guy that dined with Donald Trump at Mar-a-Lago during this campaign.
Well, and that Donald Trump doesn't know anything about and frankly doesn't care for. But yeah, look, my attitude to these people attacking my wife is she's beautiful, she's smart. What kind of man marries Usha? A very smart man and a very lucky man, importantly. And my view is, look, if these guys want to attack me or attack my views, my policy views, my personality, come after me. But don't attack my wife. She's out of your league.
But, I mean, that dinner that Trump had, and of course it was Kanye West, the guy that's praised Hitler, who arranged it all, that was back a year and a half ago, and Trump still hasn't given a full-throated denouncement of this guy who said that terrible stuff, but he said, I mean, he's a white supremacist.
Look, I think President Trump has issued plenty of condemnations on this. The one thing that I like, the one thing I like about Donald Trump, John, is that he actually will talk to anybody. But just because you talk to somebody doesn't mean you endorse their views. And look, I mean, Donald Trump spent a lot of quality time with my wife. Every time he sees her, he gives her a hug, tells her she's beautiful, and jokes around with her a little bit. I'm not at all worried about Donald Trump. I'm worried sometimes about these ridiculous attacks. But again, this is what you sign up for when you come into politics. I wish people would keep it focused on me, but whatever. They're going to say what they're going to say. My wife's tough enough to handle it, and that's a good thing.
All right, let's focus on something that's gotten a lot of attention. I mean, you know, this cat ladies comment. You talk about Democrat Party dominated by childish cat ladies. Put that aside. You also made a policy proposal,
yes,
which was why Tucker Carlson had you on for that interview. And you said you advocated giving extra votes to people with children, which seems a little...
Well, John, it's not a policy proposal. It's a thought experiment, right? Democrats said we should give children the right to vote. Some Democrats had said we're going to give children the right to vote. And I said, well, if we're going to give the rights to the children, then we should actually just allow the parents to cast those votes, right? I trust a parent more with a decision like that than I do, say, a 14-year-old. So it's a thought experiment. There are, though, policy positions behind my view that the country should become more pro-family, right? One thing I learned as a dad is after our second child we brought home, we have 3 little kids. We got these ridiculous surprise medical billings from the hospital because we had chosen an out-of-network provider, of course, at this most stressful of all imaginable moments. I've actually introduced legislation to stop moms and dads from having to go through those surprise medical billings. We want to expand the child tax credit. There's so much that we want to do, John, to make the country more pro-family. And I think it is frankly shameful that the Harris administration has lied about what I actually said. Look, sometimes family doesn't work out for people, and that's okay. But I do think that Kamala Harris herself has pursued some anti-family policies, and that is a problem and something we ought to push back against.
So I put aside whatever other people. I mean, I listened to your entire speech. I listened to the whole thing, and I saw. And you did say you weren't talking about people who physically can't have children. I mean, that's not what you were saying.
Well, and sometimes it just doesn't work out, right?
And it didn't work out. You did say that. You called it throat clearing, I think. You said, look, I'm not talking about that. But you did
because
say,
I knew people would try to misrepresent it, so it's important to be clear.
Let's look at what you exactly said. You said, when you go to the polls in this country as a parent, you should have more power. You should have more of an ability to speak your voice in a democratic republic than the people who don't have kids. I mean, you are directly saying that people with kids should have more of a voice in our democracy. Thought experiment or not about how that is done, but that is the principle. And I mean, I could read on, but you are expressing a principle here.
Again, John, it's a thought experiment. I've been a senator for 2 years. Have I proposed any legislation to that effect? Of course not. Sometimes people make remarks in response to something that somebody else has said. If it was a policy proposal, I would have made the policy proposal in my 2 years in the United States Senate. Now, I do think, John, to be clear here, because I think it's important to focus on what I actually said, I do think becoming a parent affects you in a very profound way. I've seen friends of mine, certainly in my own life, becoming a father does really give you this incredible perspective. You have this little life that you have to take care of. It's an amazing thing, and it does make you think differently about your responsibilities. So yeah, I absolutely do think that being a parent changes you in a profound way. I do not think that we ought to be changing the way that we do votes in this country. I was responding to a Democratic proposal in a very, very thought experiment way.
And you predicted that you would get attacked. You said, I'm sure the Atlantic, the Washington Post will come out and say, well, doesn't this mean non-parents don't have as much of a voice as parents? Doesn't it mean that parents get a bigger say in how our democracy functions? Yes, absolutely. So do you regret saying that? You take that back?
Look, John, again, I'm talking about a thought experiment here. And do I regret saying it? I regret that the media and the Kamala Harris campaign has frankly distorted what I said.
How's that distorting I just read your words. How's that distorting what you said?
Because they turned this into a policy proposal that I never made, John. I said I want us to be more pro-family, and I do want us to be more pro-family. And I do think, look, when you're a parent and you have children, you obviously have a different perspective, and I said that too, and I certainly believe that. But I think that the idea, John, that I actually want to change the American voting system to give 12-year-olds the right to vote and then to give control over it to their parents, it's ridiculous. I never said that. I was responding to a Democratic line.
Okay. I mean, it was a speech on the. Anyway, we'll people. The speech is online. People can
please.
Watch
But in the beginning, John, I say Democrats have proposed giving these rights to children. I say if we're going to give them to children, let the parents cast that vote.
So I want to ask you about abortion. There's this proposed amendment that's going to be on the ballot in Florida that basically codifies a constitutional right, state constitutional right, to have an abortion up to about 24 weeks. I assume this is something you oppose.
Well, what I believe, and I'm running to be the Vice President of the United States, is that the American people have to make this decision. And President Trump has said explicitly they're going to make this decision on a state-by-state level. He won the nomination of our party. He's determined what the platform is. And I think that he's doing something that's actually very, very important, which is to try to help the country find some common ground. Look, California is going to have a less restrictive abortion policy than Ohio, where we're sitting. Ohio is going to have a less restrictive abortion policy than Alabama. I think the people have to make these decisions, and that's the way for us to come together as a country over a very tough issue.
But this should be, I assume this is an easy one for you. I mean, you've been very clear about how you feel about abortion. I mean, if you've compared it to slavery.
I didn't compare it to slavery, John.
The impact on the society to slavery, yes.
Ask the question.
Yes.
Go ahead.
So, I mean, just again, the idea of codifying, whatever the state, codifying a right to abortion up to about 24 weeks. Isn't that something you oppose?
Well, look, in Ohio, we had a referendum in the state, and
you made your position clear.
aggressively advocated for the pro-life view because I want to save as many babies as possible. Also importantly, John, the people of Ohio decided by about a 60-40 margin to reject the pro-life framing, and you have to respect the will of the people. That's all that Donald Trump has said. That's what I believe. And as someone who really does want to say, John, I do want us to become a more pro-family country. I want us to have more babies and more families. I want our neighborhoods to be filled with the laughter of children and thriving families. We and the pro-life community, I think, have to figure out how to better make our case to the American people and how to make it easier to have a baby. It's way too expensive. Housing is through the roof. Medical costs are through the roof. President Trump and I have actually advanced a series of policies that would make it easier for us to have families. I think that's where we're focused on as a presidential ticket. And as the president has said, on abortion policy specifically, the states are going to make up their minds.
And Donald Trump's going to have a chance to vote on that, and he says he's going to offer his position, didn't say what it was. Would you be disappointed if Donald Trump says that he supports a constitutional right to abortion?
I'll let Donald Trump offer his position, and I'll talk about it then.
What would you encourage him to do on that, though? I mean, this is a pretty fundamental idea for you. I mean,
John, what
you've
I would
been such a leader in the pro-life movement.
What I would encourage him to do is to do what he's done up to this point, which is to try to find some common ground here and try to advance some pro-family policy so that people feel like they have more options, right? A lot of the reason that women choose to terminate a pregnancy is very often they don't feel like they have any other choice. We want to give them more options to choose to have that baby, to make it easier to raise that baby. I think Donald Trump has shown real leadership by focusing on that and not on the culture war topic of what each individual state's abortion policy should be.
You've said that Donald Trump is the greatest president of your lifetime.
He is.
Who, in your mind, is the greatest vice president of your lifetime?
It's a good question. I haven't thought much about that. I think George H.W. Bush did a very good job as vice president. You could pick a number of guys who've done a perfectly fine job, but the president really sets the tone for policy, and I think a lot more about the president than about the vice president. And fundamentally, my role in the administration is to support him in enacting the agenda. That's what I'm going to work on.
Trump was asked recently very directly, would you be ready to be president on day one?
Sure.
When he arrived. And it was notable that he didn't answer the question. Instead, what he said is the vice presidential candidate doesn't matter. I mean, what did you make when you heard him not answer that directly?
Well, he said that a million times, both in private and in public.
But he's asked really directly,
right.
Are you ready?
Most people, oh, come on, John. He's right. Most people, 99% of the country, they don't vote on who the vice presidential nominee. They're voting for Donald Trump or for Kamala Harris, not for...
So he said this a lot during these three interviews, and I completely disagree. Because I personally think your vice presidential pick can make or break your campaign. And there's no doubt in my mind that Tim Walz being the selection for Kamala Harris as the vice presidential nominee has led to a lot more people drifting towards the Democratic ticket this year. It just has. So I disagree with that notion that the vice presidential selection doesn't make a difference. Because if it didn't make a difference, why would they take so long to pick a running mate? If it didn't make a difference, why wouldn't you just run with the... Why would Trump not, try to run with Pence again? Obviously, Pence doesn't want to run with him, but you get my point. Like, if it didn't matter, why would the president be so selective in who they're going to choose as their vice president? Now, will it make a huge, difference in like the swinging of polls? Maybe not, but maybe it will, because when Tim Walz came out and made that first speech, man, that was electric, and people like really gravitated towards him. When J.D. Vance speaks, granted, he makes himself more available, so you have more opportunities to make mistakes and say maybe some things that you didn't want to say. J.D. Vance has done, according to the polls, like this is data that we're looking at here, J.D. Vance has done more damage to Trump's campaign than he has helped it. That's just the truth of the matter. So I think it does matter. And he can dance around the question all he wants to, but if Trump felt like J.D. Vance was ready to be president on day one, he would have said that, but he didn't say that. He just said something like, I like the guy, he's a good guy. Like that's all he said. It was a very simple yes or no question. I'm sure if Kamala Harris was asked that same question, do you think Tim Walz is ready to be president on day one? She would flat out just say yes. Yes, I do, and here's why. Trump didn't do that.
For JD or Tim Walz, right? But what I think that he does believe, because he made it the main focus of his vetting process, is, do I think this person can be president on day one if, God forbid, something happens? Yes. So I absolutely am sure that Donald Trump is confident in my abilities. I also think that he's right, that the politics of this really don't matter that much.
But again, that wasn't the question that he was asked. He wasn't asked, does the vice presidential selection make a difference in your campaign? No, he was asked specifically, is JD Vance ready to be president on day one? And he dodged the question. That, we all know silence speaks louder than words sometimes.
One of the proposals that's in the platform, you've talked about it, Trump's talked about it, is a mass deportation. Now, I know he said, you'll start with the easy ones, the criminals, people commit crimes, deport them. But he said deporting 15 to 20 million people. How do you actually do that?
Well, John, we have to start with the fact that we have a wide open southern border because our borders are actually...
That's not the question. That's not the question. That's not the question. Now, the more I watch this stuff, the more irritated I'm getting because you're tiptoeing, you're tap dancing around the question. He asked you a specific question. He's not asking about Kamala and her ability to be a good border czar. We know she wasn't a perfect border czar. Okay, great. If elected, what is your plan to deport 15 to 20 million people? How do you do that? Why is the first thing that you're talking about what Kamala did as border czar? That's not the question. That's not the question. The question is simple. Tell me what your policy is and how you're going to execute it. This is your opportunity to tell me that right now. You've complained over and over again through these interviews. They're all in the same video about how the conversation should be directed towards policy and not shots at each other and stuff. Okay. Well, here's a policy question. Answer the question. What are you going to do? What are you going to do to deport 15 to 20 million people out of the country? How are you going to execute it? Are they going by bus? Are they going by plane? What are we doing? How are we going to do it?
Set a lot of open border policies. They suspended.
She's not actually. She wasn't the border czar.
Oh, that was what the media called her. She assumed the title. She had control over a lot of our border policy at a time when they were suspending. Let me finish, John. The time they were suspending deportations, they stopped Donald Trump's Remain in Mexico policy, and they reinstituted catch and release. They basically threw open the gates of our country, and now we have a ton of fentanyl, a ton of people suffering.
But how are you going to get 10 to 15 to 20 million people out of the country?
Well, the first thing you have to do is to stop the bleeding, stop the open border, get Kamala Harris out of there, and actually re-implement the Remain in Mexico policy, rebuild or finish Donald Trump's border wall, and you do that and you stop the bleeding. Now, you're right. Once you do that, once you stop Kamala Harris's open border policies, you've got to do something with the people who are already here. And I think that you take a sequential approach to it. You are going to have to deport some people. If you're not willing to deport a lot of people, you're not willing to have a border when there are 20 million illegal aliens in our country.
10 to 15 million people, this is
Well, John, I think that's the wrong attitude to take of it. Okay,
you go knock on doors and ask people for their papers.
Again, but I think this is the wrong attitude towards it, right? There's 20 million people here illegally. You start with what's achievable. You do that, and then you go on to what's achievable from there. I think that if you deport a lot of violent criminals, and frankly, if you make it harder to hire illegal labor, which undercuts the wages of American workers, I think you go a lot of the way to solving the illegal immigration problem. But look, President Trump is absolutely right. You cannot have a border unless you're willing to deport some people. I think it's interesting that people focus on, well, how do you deport 18 million people? Let's start with 1 million. That's where Kamala Harris has failed, and then we can go from there.
Okay, so how do you do that? How do you deport 1 million? Again, you're not really saying anything. You're not saying anything. How do you deport these people? What is your plan? He tiptoed around the question. I don't like it. I just don't like it. It's annoying to me. It's frustrating. And again, JD Vance is not the only politician who does this. They all do it. It's super frustrating. We never get a straight answer on anything. On anything.
Finally, before you go, will you commit to this race to kind of sticking to the facts? I mean, I heard Donald Trump give this speech in Montana he just gave, and he said that Tim Walz has signed a letter letting the state kidnap children to change their gender, that allowing pedophiles to claim, to be exempt from crimes. I mean, this is not true. It's not remotely true.
Well, what President Trump said, and I haven't watched the whole rally.
What he said was not true.
What President Trump said, John, is that Tim Walz has supported taking children from their parents if the parents don't consent to gender reassignment. That is crazy. And by the way, Tim Walz gets on his high horse about mind your own damn business. One way of minding your own damn business, John, is to not try to take my children away from me if I have different moral views than you.
Allowing the state to kidnap children to change their sexual identity.
What I just explained to you, I would describe as kidnapping, John. He has absolutely done this stuff. It's not crazy, John. Come on.
It's not what
you should not be able to take people's children away from them.
And that's not what he's proposed.
If you disagree with decisions about gender reassignment, yes, he has proposed that, John. He absolutely has. Now, here's the more important thing, John. Why are we talking about inflation? Why are we talking about the fact that groceries are unaffordable thanks to Kamala Harris's policies, and so is housing? We've talked a little bit about the border. Why are we talking about the fact that the entire world is on fire because Kamala Harris's foreign policy, she's just asleep at the wheel? We have a set of plans. You talk about sticking to the facts. Donald Trump and I have a set of plans to lower the cost of housing and food, to bring peace back to the world with American leadership. That is all that we want to do. And I think it's telling that the Harris administration is focused so much on these side issues instead of on the real substance of why Americans are unhappy with Kamala Harris's leadership.
To be clear, I just asked you about something that Donald Trump brought up, not something that the Harris campaign brought up. I was asking you about Donald Trump's
No, I'm
words.
saying
Thank you.
But John, the Harris campaign, what are their policy views? They don't have a policy position on their website. Should she sit down and answer tough questions with you?
Yes,
I think she should.
Absolutely.
Where is she?
Well,
but we respect the American people enough.
We hope she'll be on the show soon.
I hope so
Thank
too,
you.
John, because the person who wants to be our president ought to sit down for some tough interviews. I'm willing to do it, and I wish she would too.
All right, J.D. Vance, thank you for your time. Really
Thanks,
appreciate
John.
it.
Appreciate it, man.
So, one thing I will say is every time J.D. Vance brings up that they haven't sat down for an interview, it seems like the reporters don't really want to talk about that much. All they have to say is, well, we hope that that'll happen soon. You got to push a little bit harder for that. Because he's right. Because the American people, we do deserve to hear from that side of the ticket. But also, we see a lot of that fear-mongering crap that that's being spewed. Show me, and this is open to viewers and subscribers, those of us who are working together to try to figure out what the truth is. Show me something, a policy, something that he signed in, Tim Walz I'm talking about, that he signed in or proposed that involved taking children away from parents if they didn't consent to gender reassignment surgery. Can somebody show me that policy? If you can show me that policy, I will believe it. I will not tell you that it's wrong. But so far, I've not seen any of that. I've not seen a policy like that. It'd be nice if Tim Walz would sit down for an interview, if Kamala Harris would sit down for an interview and they could be grilled over things. Kamala has been in the White House for the past few years. Like, I'd like to see her answer tough questions about, like, hey, what's transpired here in this country? Why are things in the condition that they are? I don't really care to hear that from J.D. Vance because he hasn't been in the Oval Office. He's been in one state, Ohio. I want to hear it directly from the people responsible. And as far as Tim Walz goes, I want to see him answer for the things that he is guilty of, like misspeaking, aka lying about being in war. Like, I think that's actually very important, and I'd like to hear him explain that one away. You can't really explain that one away, honestly. Like, that's one you just got to be straight up about that one. Like, you messed up. And obviously I want to hear about Kamala and how she plans on fixing any of these things. But again, it's like the reporters will ask the questions. And by the way, I thought this ABC one was the best one as far as like just approaching it without as much bias. Like, you really only saw the reporter get like animated when he felt like JD was either dancing around a question or saying something that wasn't true. Other than that, you know, it really, he was pretty neutral and pretty straightforward. The other ones, like, I don't know, they were, it's like the way they came at JD was kind of weird, like right off the break. But I mean, that's what these reporters do, I guess. But we have more great content coming up when it comes to this election. Again, a lot of people have been accusing me of being on one side of the fence or not. No, I just call it like I see it. And if I'm constantly calling out your candidate for something, that's because they need to be called out for it. Like, I'm not here to pick favorites. I'm not here to make you feel good. I'm here because I'm an independent voter, and I don't know who to vote for. I already have a direction that I may be leaning in, but they still, like, we still have over 80 days left until this election. I still need to be swayed. I still need to be convinced, just like a lot of other independent voters do. So, like, I'm not going to sit up here and, you know, speak nicely about your candidate because I'm afraid of what you're going to leave in the comments section. You can leave your comments if you want to. I really don't care about your feelings being hurt. I care about myself and others having the truth. That's it. So if that's what you're down for as well, like the video, share the video, and subscribe to the channel for more great content. I'll see you guys in the next video. Still, what am I? Wait, I have one more thought. I had to cut my outro. Oh, yes. If you haven't done so already, check out the true crime elements of my channel as well, where we cover all the cases and things that are going on around the country, including the Darrell Brooks trial. I've been forgetting to tell you guys about that one, so make sure you guys check that one out. Now, stay safe, stay blessed, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.